Welcome everyone to the second session of our October and Beyond, the Path Forward webinar series on examining change. And we're kicking off Lung Month, so I wanted to shout out to our friendly partners at our friends and partners at the Lung Health Foundation and their campaign this month, sharing stories of Canadians impacted by stigma at thewrongquestion.ca. So please join them in their mission to remove the unfair barrier that stigma creates for people with lung cancer and many other lung illnesses. And of course, their reach for donations for much needed lung cancer research. Our speakers today are all examining change, as you see on the agenda before you, in one way or another on our path to occupational illness prevention. And before I introduce our first speaker, I did want to note the collaborative impact amongst our occupational health and safety system partners, and most especially with Workplace Safety North, who were actually going to have Briar and the ministry have this presentation as part of their repertoire, and got wind that we were having it today, and it extended the promotion of this event to their clients. So just a big shout out to all the health and safety system partners and our health and safety associations, research partners you're about to hear from. So I hope you join us for the next 3 weeks as well. And you see the themes before you on the 12th, 19th, and 26th around research and data, workplace tools and knowledge mobilization, and continued collaboration. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our first speaker. And we're welcoming Briar Musson, who is a Senior Policy Advisor with the Ministry of Labour Training and Skills Development, Health, Safety and Insurance Policy Branch. She has extensive work experience in the area of occupational and safety policy and regulation development, and has worked on a variety of health and safety projects during her career with the ministry. She recently co-led the development of Ontario Regulation 420/21 notices and reports under sections 51 to 53.1 of the Act, fatalities, critical injuries, occupational illnesses, and other incidents, and is currently co-leading the ministry's changes to Occupational Health and Safety Act found in Schedule 15 of Bill 13, Supporting People and Businesses Act 2021, currently being considered in the Ontario legislature. So welcome, Briar.
So, good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today. As Kimberly mentioned, my name is Briar Musson, and I was the co-lead on the development of this Ontario Regulation 420/21 with the lengthy title Notices and Reports under sections 51 to 53.1 of the Act, fatalities, critical injuries, occupational illnesses, and other incidents. Although I'll be doing the presentation today, I did just want to mention that my colleague Marnie Tivey, who some of you may know, co-led this project with me, and so she's here today in the background, and a little shout out to Marnie. So for today, I'm going to run through the whole presentation, and then we can open things up for some questions. Okay, so just to set the stage, as many of you may be aware, the notification requirements that get triggered by a fatality, critical injury, and other injuries, occupational illnesses, and other incidents at the workplace are set out in sections 51 to 53.1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And as these requirements fall under the Act, they apply to all workplaces to which the OSHA applies. And the new regulation, Ontario Regulation 420/21, provides prescribed reporting requirements or regulatory reporting requirements associated with sections 51 to 53.1 of the Act. And so with this in mind, it is important that the regulation is read in tandem with the legislative requirements, as they do go hand in hand. The journey for this regulation started with a public consultation that was held between December of last year and ended in February of this year. We received a lot of feedback from stakeholders, and based on the results of the consultation, Ontario Regulation 420/21 was finalized. And as noted in this slide, it came into effect on July 1st of this year. So the introduction of this regulation impacted many regulations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, as you can see here. The first one to note is that the new regulation incorporates the critical injury definition. And so the former regulation 834, critical injury defined, was revoked. And as this new regulation consolidated reporting requirements that were found across 8 different regulations, each of the sections of those regulations were removed. And you can see the list of those sector and activity-based regulations there, and those are live links. And so you can see the exact effect on the regulations if you visit those, the links that are there. And finally, this regulation applies to all workplaces to which the OSHA applies. And in order to make this happen for farming operations, the farming operations regulation under the Occupational Health and Safety Act needed to be amended to list Ontario Regulation 4/2021 as applying to those workplaces. And so you see that there at the bottom of the list. So now for an overview of the regulation itself. So prior to July 1st, there were 8 regulations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act that prescribed reporting requirements. And there were some sectors or workplaces that had no regulation that applied. So for example, there were no prescribed or no regulatory reporting requirements that applied to farming operations or to schools, for example. And so now with Ontario Regulation 4/2021, there is one regulation that applies to all workplaces equally. Next in the chart there, so prior to July 1st, there was a standalone regulation that provided the definition for critical injury. This definition moved over into the new regulation as it was set out in Regulation 834. In other words, it remained the same, but it did move over. And so the standalone regulation was revoked. And one of the more noteworthy changes of this new regulation is that it has introduced a new definition for medical attention. This definition was introduced to clarify when non-disabling injuries are required to be notified under Section 52(1) of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. As you may recall, Section 52(1) requires a written notice to be shared with the Joint Health and Safety Committee, Health and Safety Rep, and Union when someone is disabled from their usual work or if they required medical attention. And one thing to note when interpreting this new definition is to go back to the Act and actually replace the words medical attention with the new definition, as there is some important context that is picked up when you do this. So just to demonstrate, Section 52(1) would then read, if a person is disabled from performing his or her usual work or requires treatment from a legally qualified medical practitioner or registered nurse. And in this case, requires treatment are the operative words. And so the injury must have required treatment from a doctor, surgeon, or nurse practitioner in order for the injury to be notifiable. So the new regulation sets out a single set of written reporting requirements for Section 51 and 52 notices and reports. And just to remind us, Section 51 of the Act relates to fatalities and critical injuries. Section 52(1) we just spoke about with respect to disabling injuries and those requiring medical attention. And Section 52(2) of the Act relates to occupational illness reporting. And so the regulation now has a single set of written reporting requirements that apply to all workplaces. And these written reporting requirements are essentially the required information that is to be included in the written notices and reports that employers produce when following those incidents outlined in Sections 51 and 52 of the Act. two things to note about the information requirements. First, they only apply to workers. So the obligation to report under the Act for non-workers remains the same. So for example, the critical injury reporting for any persons who are critically injured at the workplace remain the same. But even though employers must still report, they're not obligated to provide the same information as is required when the incident involves a worker. The regulation also specifies when the information requirements apply for motor vehicle incidents on public highways or the 407. And so the information requirements only apply when the worker affected was working at a project. So for example, a construction worker doing road work, or and also the worker affected was not traveling in the motor vehicle at the time of the collision. And so that an example there would be a tow truck driver fixing a flat tire. And in those situations, the full set of information would be required to be reported in the written documents. So Section 53 of the Act addresses notification requirements when certain incidents occur, even if no one is injured. So for example, if there is an unexpected explosion or fire on a construction project or a mine, then a notification is triggered. And one of the requirements in Section 53 is that notification be given when there is a failure of any equipment, machine, device, article, or thing at a project site, mine, or mining plant. So the new regulation clarifies that the reporting requirements apply when such a failure could have posed a risk to the life, health, or safety of a worker. And the purpose of this was to reflect the intent of that notification. In addition to the notifiable incidents that are listed in the Act, so if you go to Section 53 of the Act, you will see notifiable incidents set out there. But in addition to those, there's some regulations that list additional notifiable incidents. And those lists moved over into the new regulation, Ontario Regulation 42021, and they moved over unchanged. And then again, similar to the Section 51 and 52 reporting, a single set of information requirements, or in other words, the information that employers must include in the written notices, are set out for all Section 53 notifications. So some of the regulations had a requirement that following the written notices or reports required under Sections 51 and 52, a professional engineer provide a written opinion stating the cause of the occurrence within 14 days. And so these requirements that were set out in a few regulations listed there have moved over into Ontario Regulation 42021, and they moved over unchanged. And last, but certainly not least, the new regulation sets out a single record-keeping requirement. So now a copy of all written notice or reports that are created as required under Sections 51 to 53.1 of the Act must be retained for 3 years. And one thing that is noteworthy here is that it refers back to Sections 51 to 53.1 of the Act. So anytime the Act requires notification, this record-keeping requirement is triggered. So to support the implementation of the regulation, the ministry has updated the webpage on reporting workplace incidents and illnesses. A lot of time was spent on this page to try and organize the information in a clear way, and I encourage you to visit it if you'd like to read more about Sections 51 to 53 and Ontario Regulation 42021 reporting requirements. One thing that you will note is that one of the main buttons near the top of the web page there, so the one in blue, says submit a report or notice. And this is a really exciting part of the implementation of this regulation, as it brings you to the ministry's new electronic reporting form. So here's a glimpse at the new electronic reporting form that the ministry has made available to facilitate written notification and reporting. Noteworthy about the form, and as seen in the screenshot, the form can be used to submit any section 51, 52, or 53 notifications. It also has the capacity of being saved for record keeping purposes and for emailing to Joint Health and Safety Committee, Health and Safety Rep, and unions as required. So that brings me to the end of the overview of the regulation, but at this point, happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Briar, so much. So please feel free to type some questions in the chat, and I had some myself. Briar, this is exciting. I mean, it's always hard to make legislation exciting, but I did want to ask about the sharing of your results from the consultations. Do you know how do you folks share some of the results of these consultations that go out for regulatory change?
Do you mean share them with the public, like outward sharing?
Yeah.
So we typically, well, we don't make them sort of readily publicly available. They certainly are FOI-able. But I would say that there's often some really great collaboration among our stakeholders, and certainly when there is a common interest in flagging something that's of importance or something that some extra attention wants to be given to, then we do definitely see some collaborating among the stakeholders and among the groups. So yeah, I think that's probably.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I did want to make special note of the changes for this audience, specifically around, like you mentioned, the Joint Health and Safety Committee, the internal responsibility system being brought to light here with, not only notifying of occupational illness, since we're talking about occupational illness prevention, but sharing this with your Joint Health and Safety Committee, with your union, with your reps, and having those records retained for 3 years. So that's, yeah, I see a question.
I just wanted to say, yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And certainly Marnie and I, really took a lot of time going through the results of the consultation, and this regulation was intended to be something that made a lot of sense on both sides, right? So we ensured that the internal responsibility system was upheld and wanted to sort of had that top of mind, but then also keep things sort of clear and practical, and so that was definitely part of the design of this regulation.
Great. And I see a question that along the same lines with the Joint Health and Safety Committee involvement, and they're asking, what is the role specifically that the Joint Health and Safety Committee would have in the reporting process? So they're looking that, is it expected that the data, that they will get the data from the online form, and what role do they play in the reporting process?
So as of right now, the Joint Health and Safety Committees receive a copy of the reports. It's notice and report is sometimes used interchangeably because there's different, it's used in different parts of the Act, but the written reports that are developed by the employer are shared with the Joint Health and Safety Committees when there is a Section 52 or a Section 53 notification. What you may note is in Bill 13, which was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there is currently a proposed amendment being considered by the legislature to extend Section 51 written reports so that those would automatically go to Joint Health and Safety Committee, Health and Safety Rep, and the union. Joint Health and Safety Committees do have some powers. They have some investigative powers, and they do produce their own reports following a fatality or critical injury. So there's a big involvement with the Joint Health and Safety Committee following that. But there is the Joint Health and Safety Committees do receive that report that the employer would have produced and submits to the ministry. They receive a copy of it as well following a 52 or 53 incident.
Confused about an opinion from a professional engineer. And Dorothy is looking to speak to US rules.
Evan here. I just wanted to follow up on the opinion from a engineer on the cause of a reportable incident. And I'm just thinking, if you think about occupational illness, how is a professional engineer going to know what the cause of an occupational illness is? I'm just wondering why it's just a professional engineer. That's my question. Thank you.
So if you look at the Ontario regulation for 2021, there's only very specific instances that opinion from a professional engineer is triggered, and it isn't triggered with the occupational illness reporting. Now, certainly, I think when we brought together, this was the first step in trying to modernize and clarify some of the requirements, and definitely through this journey we acknowledged that there will be a lot of future opportunities, and it highlights some opportunities when we brought everything together. But yeah, if you do refer back to for 2021, I'm just trying to look here in my notes to see if I can refer to them specifically, but it's only in healthcare facilities, construction projects, and window cleaning, and it tends to link back to situations where a professional engineer might have provided advice in the first place. It doesn't always link back cleanly that way, but that's kind of the intent, is that it's sort of verifying, sort of a loop back.
Okay.
So, Briar, my name's Dorothy Wigmore. I'm done stuff, health and safety work for a long time as a hygienist, ergonomist, and other things, and have written health and safety laws and regulations. So I appreciate the difficulties in doing that. But I've also worked in the States, and I rarely have good things to say about the US health and safety law. But one of the things that's very good there, or relatively good, is that they have this thing called the 300 log, where any kind of injury or illness has to be reported. And there has to be an annual summary, and it has to be accessible to unions and workers and former workers on request. It has to be kept for 5 years. What, if I'm understanding correctly, because I've just moved from Manitoba, so I'm still relearning Ontario law. So what happens to the daily injuries that occur in a workplace? How are those kept track of, and who gets to know about them? Is there anything like the US system at all?
So it's sort of a complex question. So part of it, I would say, is one, certainly there's reporting requirements that fall under the Workplace Safety Insurance Act. And so that would be for compensation purposes. And they certainly make a lot of their data readily available. And those would include your injury and illness statistics. And then there's reporting that occurs under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So I believe that there's some statistics that maybe the number of critical injuries that get published by the ministry, but really what happens is, following a notifiable incident, let's say a critical injury at the workplace, the Occupational Health and Safety Act requires that notification be made to the ministry. So we receive notification, and then also to the Joint Health and Safety Committee and or Health and Safety rep and the union. So it's more of an internal process, and not currently not sort of made sort of readily publicly available. Now, part of that is also that there's kind of this evolution of data that I think is happening, and there's certainly, I think everybody would agree that a hope that as we get more organized with the requirements, so everything's in one place now. We now have our electronic reporting form. There's a lot of opportunities that come with that. But at the moment, yeah, I don't think that we're quite as far along as what you're describing.
Because, I mean, that's what the joint committees and union reps and others who might work with them, or the OCOWs of clinics need, is often is some kind of understanding of what the daily or the regular kinds of injuries and illnesses are, not just the critical incidents, because they're really fairly limited. And nobody, I don't think anybody would disagree that there's a huge difference between what gets reported to the comp board and what actually happens in a workplace. So that I'm looking at that gap and just wondering, are you folks trying to fill it in any way?
Yeah, so what I would say to that is, one, it's not just the critical injury. So joint health and safety committees will receive notification of critical injuries, the disabling ones, and those that required medical attention, as well as all the occupational illness reports and the notifiable incidents. So the joint health and safety committees definitely receive the information. And then now with building in, like, one of the sort of big benefits we see in building in this record keeping requirement is there is now an opportunity to look at some things over time. I appreciate, you know, it's 3 years, but this does provide some opportunity for some collaboration and the information. So it is available. It's just more that there's no like central database. And in some cases, this is, there are some, you know, private information that is disclosed in some of these reports. So yeah.
Well, anyway, I think that there's that
opportunity.
I hope that you're paying some attention to what OSHA is doing in the States. And in fact, they're making this stuff public. There was a big fight about it. And I'm not quite sure where it's at, but their intention was to make these reports public so they'd be online and they could be used for analysis by people beyond the health and safety committees. So
yeah,
anyway,
for sure. Yeah, and we're definitely always open to hearing about new opportunities. And yeah, we're hoping this is just the beginning. So, and yeah, we're excited to have a proposal being considered by the legislature to amend the act and, you know, keep on this journey. So thank you for your comments, and we are thinking about it, and you will make us add it again to the list or put a highlight on it.
Thanks, Briar. And there's another question about, and I would say to support that, some of this action on modernization and keeping data centralized through this online reporting system is sort of supporting, you know, the ministry's whole shift to, you know, being data and evidence driven and having an, you know, some data strategy groups and collection of that. So it's really good to see. And the question is, will the online report trigger an incident number?
So that's sort of a back office question. Indeed, every single event that is logged into the ministry gets a event number. My understanding, but I don't want to speak out of turn, is that the internal process is the report comes in, the contact center uses that report to trigger its own sort of incident number and start to document the case. But definitely every single incident that's sort of notifiable incident that's reported to the ministry does have an incident number. But whether they sort of marry up with this form in sort of a harmonized way, I'm not 100% sure. And I don't want to speak out of turn because that is definitely like internal contact center process, more operational.
No worries. And there's a couple of good questions here and comment from one of our speakers, our next speaker, and John Petrick. So feel free to unmute, you guys. But Victoria's asking specifically if there's been an evaluation of compliance with reporting. We know that this is one of the big problems for us with occupational illness prevention is under recognition and under reporting. And so looking at accepted claims and seeing how many the ministry received reporting on versus and then John saying, yeah, flipping that around, does WSIB inform the last accident employer before approving claims? So these are, it's sort of.
Yeah, a little bit, again, a little bit more on the operational side, but but most certainly we are aware of the underreporting. It's been sort of documented. The auditor's report speaks to it. From a policy perspective and sort of Marnie and I coming at this regulation, we do hope that this will have a positive impact in that before we had requirements spread out over 10 different regulations if you included the critical injury definition, and they were all a little bit different. And so now there's one place. The title of the regulation is quite intentional. It's hard to miss it when you look at the list of regulations and you know exactly what you're getting at when you see that title. So we do hope, at least from a policy perspective, that this will have a positive impact on reporting, and working through updating our webpage and introducing this new electronic form, making it clearer, easier. These sorts of things we sort of see as hopefully having a really positive impact. The record keeping helps so that you can see over the last couple of years, things have to be in record now, whereas before they didn't. So even let's say if a joint health and safety committee wants to double check about something they've heard and request to see a copy of a record, you know, these things should be there. And so all this, we hope there's sort of an interplay between this regulation and certainly what we also recognize and as I said, well documented, kind of a significant issue with underreporting.
Yeah, great. And Marnie will probably kill me, but you know, it's excellent with the 3-year works for, you know, some of the reporting critical incident, you know, but for section 52 and occupational illness, we know that latency does, you know, it's great. We're in a trend for that, but maybe we could take the reporting that you've done this good work online and, you know, transfer that to like hygiene reports that are kept more for 40, right? Because, you know, we know that latency alone for reporting any occupational illness, the 3 years may not give us the window that we want.
Well, and having things in electronic form makes it easier too, right? There's nothing to say joint health and safety committees don't internally decide to just start housing their own reports that they receive and keep those for a longer period than 3 years. So,
right, excellent. Are there any other questions, Jen, that you see, or Tony from Facebook, or anybody else want to raise a hand for Briar?
I don't see anything else.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we will, Briar, we have, the speakers have accepted also, which is good news, to stay until the end if we have time for a little bit more of a panel discussion or question and answer once you get sort of the breadth of the day, or the afternoon, the couple hours. So Briar may be around at the end as well if you think of something in the interim. So thanks, Briar.
definitely, yeah, we're always welcome to receive questions and answer questions and looking for opportunities and ideas. So really appreciate those questions, and we're hoping this is just the beginning. So yeah, lots of good work ahead. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, Briar. Excellent.